Wednesday evening, Wednesday afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. It's a pleasure to welcome you back. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today for another exciting show and a little update with a gentleman that joined us a couple of months ago in a bit of a transition period in his life and business ventures. And here we are months later after an exciting PCA 2021 last year where we met, and now with Ferio Tego fully underway. It is my pleasure, my privilege and honor to welcome the one and only, the cigar gentleman, Herklots. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you so much. Let me know if you can hear me.
Very well indeed. All good.
Great.
All perfect there. Michael, at the beginning of the last show that you and I shared, I asked if your journey were a drum beat or a specific rhythm, what would that be or sound like? And I vividly and fondly remember that you said the opening prologue to a Broadway show, maybe with just a little bit of swing and flair and jazz thrown in there, just before the curtains go up. Now, how has that changed over the past months? And do you feel like you're now smack in the middle of a big fat rock and roll beat?
Yeah, I think at this point we may be approaching somewhere between heavy metal and punk. I don't know. It might be something like Bohemian Rhapsody. You've got something very symphonic and classical, and yet it's also so completely chaotic and bonkers. That is probably about where Ferio Tego is at this point. But it is what I would say though is it is very steady and it is very deliberate and it feels great.
Well, that's a wonderful statement and great to hear. And indeed, you have been all over the place in a very good way in terms of social media presence in general. Ferio Tego was probably the most exciting brand launch and new cigar to hit the market in 2021. You're one of the most respected professionals of the industry in general, and now you're starting this new chapter in your own life. Do you still feel like you're very much in startup mode, or do you feel like it's sort of settled in and you're comfortable and good with where you are at this moment with the company?
Well, it's a very difficult question to answer. Let me answer it at the highest level. This year is 2022. I began my career in the industry in 1999. And I still very much feel like a newcomer to the industry. And so when I look at those who I learn from and surround myself with and work with, you are talking about real legends, real lifelong careers. My 20-something years is really very little in comparison to some of those I admire most. So even in the totality of my career, I very much feel like I am still a newcomer. Now, that said, I've had a lot of wonderful experiences, starting with my 9 years at Davidoff after some time in retail, followed then by my 9 years at Nat Sherman. So now I certainly feel as though what is arguably the third major chapter of my career as Ferio Tego, I do certainly feel like that is in its infancy, but I don't feel that that it is underdeveloped, meaning because of the good fortune I've had in my career, all the experiences I've had in my career, the relationships I've built, thank God I am not starting from scratch with Ferio Tego. In fact, quite the contrary. I have an incredible advantage because of all the opportunities, my time that I've spent in market working for all these other people, that I have relationships all over the world. I have brands that are already known and established, and even Ferio Tego, which is our newest, as you thoughtfully pointed out, it really has garnered such profound enthusiasm and momentum in such a short amount of time, that we really are off to a great start, and we have certainly hit the ground running. And again, although I still feel a bit in our infancy, if we look at just the actuals of where Ferio Tego is today, as of June 15th, we are just 8.5 months or so in market, which seems like it's been a bit longer because we spent about a year just starting over, but we've only been in market 8.5 months. And to date, we have just passed the 700 store mark, and approaching 800. So when you're talking about 800 stores in 8 months as a startup, obviously that is not done as a startup alone. That's done because of all the support from our manufacturing partners, certainly the support of our distribution partner, Davidoff USA, and the support of retailers around the country, who have just supported us, brought us in, took a chance, put us in their shops, and then all of those consumers who have supported us and invested in us and have enjoyed our products. It's really been it's been a humbling experience, that's for sure. You're muted, Reinhard, sorry.
Conceptualizing your company, a specific brand or a product, is always one thing. Launching it, seeing it in the market, and hearing people's feedback and criticism is a different animal altogether. Has the launch and the subsequent feedback from consumers changed your perspective on the initial proposition in any way, shape, or form?
To be honest, we didn't have much of an initial proposition. We knew the very long-term play. We had a strategy for how to execute it in the short term, but I think all of us took a very pragmatic, realistic approach that what we are doing is, for all intents and purposes, from scratch from a business standpoint. And what that means is, even though we hoped that there were some legacy customers, even though we hoped that the goodwill and enthusiasm that appeared to be in the ramp up, we hoped that that was genuine, we weren't counting on any of it. And so we went into our launch as if we were truly from scratch, with generally low to no expectations and high, if not unrealistic, hopes and ambitions. And I would say that where we have netted out is really in a perfect middle ground. We, as of, again, now just 8 months in business, we successfully launched 2 limited edition blends under our flagship brand, Ferio Tego, and we sold out 100% of those inventories in 24 hours. That exceeded my expectations when I developed those cigars in the first place. We subsequently launched Timeless from the Dominican Republic, Prestige and Sterling. I would say Prestige hit the ground at expectations, although fortunately Sterling exceeded our expectations, or at least our forecasts, based on some of the historical support for that brand. It was always a bit on the higher end above Prestige, but upon its release, Sterling really hit the ground running, and it has not stopped. So Sterling has really quite exceeded our expectations and has now maintained that position. We followed those up with Supreme and Panamericana from Nicaragua, and I would say both of those met expectations, although like Sterling, Panamericana has also taken a larger piece of the pie than it once represented when it was sold previously. So Timeless in its totality is proving to be, it's proving to have a momentum and a fan base and a sort of groundswell of support for those four blends that I am very, very encouraged by. And then when you look at Metropolitan, which are among our oldest blends, although some of them are more recent, but they represent the oldest styles. That was always because they were so legacy. Some of them date back to 1994 and 1995. The expectation was that they would leap to the front of the race. That was not our hope, but that was the expectation. What I'm really happy to see is that they are continuing to grow and increase their share, but not at the expense of Timeless. And so that really means that all the brands are starting to find their homes, and they're starting to find new homes, that the equity that's being built for Metropolitan and Timeless is truly being built under the Ferio Tego umbrella, as opposed to simply relaunching under their pre-existing equities. And so that all gives me a tremendous amount of confidence that our long-term ability to grow those brands and sustain those brands in market under our new flagship umbrella of Ferio Tego, and at the same time really continue to grow and build Ferio Tego. We are playing this as a marathon. We are not playing this as a sprint, and all indications would suggest that so far so good, and I have no reason to believe that they would go anywhere else but continuing forward and up.
That's wonderful to hear. Even though I must confess, I have a hard time believing that a highly professional, well-organized gentleman like yourself goes into such an endeavor without a clear path forward and a very strong idea how this whole thing was going to evolve.
But Reinhard, you have to remember, I'm a musician. I'm an artist. We are not well-oiled, organized, strategic people. We're artists, and we're, erratic, and we think with our hearts, and we forget that we have brains. And, there's way more art than science in everything we do. If I were on my own in this endeavor, this would have been a complete disaster. Thank God my business partner, Brendon, was the CFO of Nat Sherman, and he has literally all of the skills that are completely void in my life, and that is organization and pragmatism and realism and forecasting and all those great attributes, which those are not my strong side. But together, we really are a perfect partnership. And then you add to that the profoundly incredible structure of Davidoff USA and their team, and now we've got a real winning proposition.
I hear you on that, and it's very interesting to see, and with other brands that were recently launched. I mean, just 2 weeks ago, I believe it was, we spoke with Ricky Rodriguez, who pretty much said the same thing about the way they set up their company and his business partner keeping him on track. What you're excellent in, though, is hosting people, treating people well, the artistic side, as you mentioned, as we discussed in great length last time. We're both musicians and drummers at heart and from heart. You have the incredible ability to bring people together, speak from the heart, and in the most eloquent and elegant way, share knowledge and experience. Justin just commented on Facebook that he could listen to Michael Herklots share his wealth of knowledge all day. And I certainly agree with that. But you're on the road a lot now, hosting events, introducing people to Ferio Tego. Do you think, though, that people buy more into the product or the brand? Or is it about Michael Herklots then? And to give you an analogy, my other background is in hospitality, in the wines and spirits side, and in the bar and restaurant world, there's certain concepts that purely work and function because the owner, the host, is there, and you don't go to XYZ bar, but you go to Michael because he treats you in a certain way and because of his hosting ability. Whereas other concepts, especially when they're much larger, they need to strategically from the very beginning implement a certain structure and set up the business in a certain way so that it's not dependent on the people behind it, or at least the owners, or the management structure. How do you think about that, and where do you see Ferio Tego plug in there?
I have spent a lot of time in bars, so that's about all I know about hospitality. But what I would say is, as I've visited restaurants in multiple markets, and my personality is such, and I think yours likely the same. We like to know people. We like to have a guy, whether it's an owner, a manager, a bartender, a tailor, a doctor, a lawyer, whatever it is. We just want one, maybe a few at best. And there's something meaningful about the relationship that is part of the experience. But I can also think of those places that I go to regularly where I would see people regularly, and I would ask, who is that guy? I see him all the time. And the response would be, he doesn't really talk to us. I don't know. He's here all the time, but he's not, I don't know anything about him. And I think that really speaks to, it is not necessarily always up to the product, and the product could be a place, the product could be a thing. It really is up to the customer. But what makes places and things and brands important is the ability to be meaningful to all of them. And so that means if, for example, you are from New York and your grandfather was smoking the Metropolitan since 1995, and you are attached to Metropolitan, not because it was Nat Sherman, not because it is Ferio Tego, and not because of Michael Herklots, but solely because your grandfather enjoyed it, and therefore you do too. That is just as important from a brand perspective to me, just as authentic as if I've known you for 25 years and you are supporting me and my endeavors. There's something to be said for being aware of all of those opportunities to be accommodating. And whether it's nostalgic, whether it's in hospitality, or whether it is just purely in delivering quality and consistency time after time after time after time, and over-delivering on value, I think that is somehow where all roads lead when it comes to brand. And so as much as I would love to say, oh, since this became my company, boy, everybody really just loves it, that is absolutely not the case. In fact, there are a lot of customers who have never heard of Ferio Tego and are buying Metropolitan today because they used to buy it before and they see it back. They've never heard of me. They've never heard of Ferio Tego. Half of them had never heard of Nat Sherman. They didn't realize what they were buying. They just knew it was the green one with the clock on it, and that was good enough. And if that's all we have to be to them, no problem. But no matter how they relate to us, we still have to over-deliver in value. We still have to achieve consistency and quality. And we have to do it in every cigar, regardless of how a customer feels or how a customer is attracted to us as a brand or as a company or as people.
It's an interesting thought, and I find that somehow challenging to, when you conceptualize your business, when you strategize about the right way moving forward, where do you ultimately want to play this? And I think what's incredible.
Well, here's a great example. I mean, this is the perfect example. An opportunity like this is really and very specifically targeted. anybody who is enjoying this call now live, whether you're on the Zoom, whether you're on Facebook Live, YouTube, or you watch this after, you're talking about a very specific and targeted group of consumers who care to know the person, who care to know the story. That is to me, that's a very special group of people, because you're speaking my language. We are the same. But the reality is, there are way more people buying Metropolitan, for example, than there are people on this call and who will watch this video. And that's perfectly fine. But it's our job to make sure that we are delivering the most meaningful, memorable moments to each one of those groups. And so for me, a group like this, well, this feels like home to me. I get you guys, and girls. This is great. This is totally my bag. For those who don't, well, I don't understand that. But I'm going to make sure that I'm working with people who do, to make sure that the brand is in the right places, in the right channels, so that those people who just recognize brand, just recognize experience, that they're able to get what they're looking for. Because what I don't ever want to do is alienate any of these groups. These brands have been around too long. So it's not that I'm trying to develop very specific targeted strategy. More importantly, I'd say I'm just saying yes to every opportunity, knowing that each one of those is a different net. That's sort of, it's a different set of bait and a different net, and we're going to attract different fish. And hopefully by the end of this, I've got all the bait, all the nets, and all the fish enjoying Ferio.
People sometimes say, if you're trying to please everybody, it will never work. And if you're trying to be everything to everybody, that also wouldn't work.
Yeah, but let's be very specific. I'm not trying to please everybody, and I'm not trying to be everything to everybody. I am trying to be the very best I can be. I'm trying to deliver the best work I have ever done. I'm trying to make the best cigars I have ever made. And thank God we have 3 manufacturing partners in all 3 major manufacturing countries available to the US market that are all on board with delivering that same philosophy. That is very unique. And so if this was Joe Public starting a cigar company from scratch, you would have to take a very different approach than what we're taking. We've started a cigar company from scratch with 9 blends and 42 unique front marks that are manufactured in 3 countries, not taking into account our limited editions. That's getting a little bit closer to having something for everybody. But even when you look at the landscape of what we offer, we are also quite limited. Our price range is from $7 US to $21 US. Again, only made in those 3 countries. And we don't make bundles, for example. We don't make mass market. We don't make ridiculously $100, $200, $300 cigars either. We don't make anything that is so full-bodied that it makes your armpits sweat, right? There are lots of things that other people like that we don't offer. We don't speak Spanish. We're not a Spanish company. We're an American company. There are lots of things that we aren't. So where I split that hair, Reinhard, is Ferio Tego is Ferio Tego, and we are developing products and bringing them to market in a specific way that we believe is right. But company and brand is different than route to market and how we speak to market. And I think that is where we can cast a much wider net. But when it comes to what is the product and what is the experience and what is the proposition of Ferio Tego, that is very specific and very deliberate and very focused. Even though, again, it is wider than, say, others who are country specific or segment specific or sort of flavor strength category specific. We are wide there, but that's also in keeping with my philosophy anyway. So I play jazz, I play rock, I play funk, I play theater. So we have mild, we have full, we have medium, we have Nicaragua, Dominican, Honduras. Yeah, I'm okay with being versatile.
Excellent point. And I love how you clearly differentiated the product side, the aromaticity and the delivery in terms of, you know, the olfactory and gustatory, all the flavors, the cigar experience, but your route to market. And that's two very distinct things. And more and more on the show, we're also talking about distribution and way to market, and not purely about the manufacturing, the blending, but everything else that needs to be taken into consideration, which plays probably just as important a role as the blending component, and how you bring those products together and make them unique from a cigar experience perspective.
Well, the reality is, as a purist, and I think probably all of us have had the opportunity to smoke things blind. And when you taste anything blind, it really gives you this incredible sense of anonymity, of just clean and pure analysis. But we've probably all experienced the two other things that come with that. Number one, saying, I really want to know what this is. And number two, changing our opinion after we've learned what it is. So we could be smoking something and we think it is inferior, and then we discover what it is and say to ourselves, wow, I'm surprised it's like this, right? We've now just added a bias to blind. But that's because we don't consume blind. We don't just consume with our palates. We consume with our eyes and our emotions and our heart and our ego. That is what consumption is all about. And, you know, on a personal level, no different than going to the bars I like, or shopping in the stores I like because I know someone. You know, when you pick this cigar up, I want you to love it before you light it. I want you to look at it and already love it, because you know what it means. You know what it means to me, and hopefully you know what it means to you. And it should mean something more than just great flavor and great taste and consistency and quality. That is what a brand is. You know, we all drive vehicles, but there's a lot of discretion that goes into our vehicle beyond gas mileage or safety, because there's something about the way it makes us feel when we open the door and sit down and put the key in. And some people don't care about that. They just want the most efficient way to get from place A to place B. But some people really do. And the badge on the front and the logo on your key and the leather and the window and the engine, those things are important. No different than a bottle of wine, no different than a wristwatch or a garment or any of those things. And so of course we have to over deliver on quality. We have to over deliver on consistency. The product must be great to be able to be enjoyed blind. But when you smoke it aware, it should be even better. It should be even more fulfilling, because then you're not just enjoying it with your palate. You're not just enjoying it intelligently. You're enjoying it passionately. And I mean, God Almighty, if we've learned anything in the last 2 years, it's that we want to be around people we love. We want to enjoy brands we love. You know, we don't want to take chances anymore. We want sure things. I can't think of anything more that I've learned in 2 years of absolute unknown craziness than how much I have appreciated the things I can depend on. My family, my friends, and products that I love, that I know are dependable and have been there for me. Those have been as important to me as hugs from my family when I couldn't get them. You know, it's that level of trust and you know, that's what makes real great brands. And I want Ferio Tego to be that.
A holistic experience, taking all the surrounding elements into consideration. And I even think, adding to what you said before, that even the people who don't care or seem to don't care about all these little nuances and the more intricate details, subconsciously they probably still do, because the way we perceive and the way we are as human beings, all these little elements come into play. It's the lighting, the music, it's the tactile, it's the visual, it's how you design the box, how the cigar ring is so beautifully and in the most ornate way designed, crafted, and put together and then assembled to the cigar. Ultimately, subconsciously, that will always do something to people, whether we realize it or not, or whether we like it or not. I think that is very, very important to take into consideration. I love the way you spoke about brand as well. What in essence does brand mean to you, or where do you feel like brands are truly made, or it might be their downfall?
Well, I think brands can mean different things depending on what stage they are in their arc. If we think about time-honored brands, even in our industry, brands that I have admired and respected, Davidoff, Dunhill, these are brands that once, Nat Sherman for that matter, these were brands that were once people that then became places and things. So the brand was born of a person. There are other brands that don't have that same genesis and then have different arcs. But Rolex, I don't believe there was a Mr. Rolex. I don't know the history well, but I don't think there was. So there are brands that are born to be brands. There are brands that are born out of people that become brands. But the greatest brands are the ones that are able to embrace and preserve and maintain and then exude their authenticity. That brands should be very clear in what they are, and probably more important, what they are not. I'll give you an example. When we launched Ferio, when we announced the Ferio Tego, Elegancia, and Generoso, I received criticism immediately that the product was too expensive. And so I responded to some of those criticisms. My goodness, I'm so sorry. Did the cigars not burn properly? Or did you have did the box fall apart? Like, did the humidor not work? What happened where it wasn't worth the price? Now, of course, the product hadn't even been in market yet. We were still 2 months out, and yet there was already a judgment that somehow the product wasn't worth it. The follow-up criticism to that was, keep the box, keep all your bands, and sell it to me for $12 less. And that's criticism I just didn't respond to, because that would be the equivalent of saying, the Mercedes is too expensive. You can keep the big engine and keep the leather seats. I'll take a Mercedes with fabric seats and a roll down window. And the reality is that Mercedes is not the badge on the front of the car. Mercedes is the entirety, front to trunk, tires to sunroof. The entirety is what makes Mercedes Mercedes. One roll down window and it is not Mercedes. And so as much as I think people would like to be a part of a brand, but they want the brand to come to them, that's where brands fail. And so that goes back to the point that you brought up earlier, which is, how do you be something to everyone? You can't. But if you are speaking to everyone and you're teaching everyone and you are advocating to everyone in the most authentic way, then at least everyone equally can assess the value and decide whether that is the right investment for them or not. And if it's not, that's okay. And more times than not, I can think of many brands that I love and admire that I will never, ever own. Just, it's not going to happen. It's not that I don't want to spend the money. I could never spend the money. It will never happen for me. And yet my admiration for these brands are profound just because of how rock solid they are, how thoughtfully they are curated, and how authentic they are to their core of what they are, and more specifically what they aren't. And so that's a very long way to answer your question, but it's the only way I know how to answer any of these questions, obviously. Is brands thrive when they are truly authentic. If you start making up some bullshit story, someone's going to see through that. And it may not be everybody, but someone's going to see through it, especially people who know. And that could be a story about anything. It could be about wine and the amazing estate that these grapes came from, or it could be, you know, the extra barrel aging of something that we all know just by tasting and color, it did not go through the process. Cigars, we do exactly the same thing. We embellish dates and years and seeds, and ultimately there are pieces to those stories that we love until the moment we find out that we were lied to. And we all know what it feels like to be lied to, whether it's from a friend, from a family member, from a brand, from anything. The moment that you see the wizard behind the curtain and it's something else, that's terribly disappointing. And for me, transparency leads in our business, and transparency is the key to our authenticity. And so as long as we are transparent and we are honest and we bring people along and we keep people posted along the way, which is what I tried to do as we closed Nat Sherman. I've certainly tried to do it now as we launch and grow Ferio Tego. We lead with honesty, we lead with transparency, we lead with authenticity, or that creates authenticity. And then it's our job to just do it consistently, product after product, year after year, meeting after meeting, conference after conference, whatever it takes. You know, there's a saying that says, if you never lie, it's awfully easy to remember the truth. To me, that's a pretty solid business model. So we're just going to lead with truth. What you see is what you get. And then ultimately, if you decide not to like it, then you must have great reason not to like it. And that's perfectly fine too. I hope you'll try something else.
Excellent point. Sai had a question which very much relates to what we just discussed. Sai, jump on.
Unmute. I better unmute myself. Greetings from Ireland, guys. Good to see you all again. Nice and sunny here for the change. I just had a quick question. When you say overcommit on quality, etc., and transparency and all that, that's good and all that. But what are the steps you consider overcommitting compared to other brands or other great brands out there?
If I said overcommit, that's not what I meant. I meant I want to overdeliver.
Yeah, overdeliver. Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
overdeliver. I think today there are. I measure everything against what I call the Amazon factor and the internet factor, which is anybody can buy anything they want today while seated on their toilet. Now, if you can buy anything you want, a car, a home, cigars, anything while seated on your toilet, then if you walk in to a store, that brick and mortar store must over deliver on what the base expectations are from your toilet. You can get an answer to any question you'd like while seated on your toilet. So you could think to yourself, why are those leaves brown and the rest of those leaves are green? And then you can Google, why are some leaves brown when all other leaves are green, on your phone while seated on the toilet? And when you do that, you'll get 10 or 12 answers and be satisfied. And then you go on with whatever you're doing. if we are talking about delivering knowledge and honesty and transparency, I have to over deliver what could be delivered simply by the internet or Google. And so in the way we communicate, in the way we talk about our business, it's not just this is made in Nicaragua with a Costa Rican filler, Nicaraguan filler, and Ecuador Sumatra wrapper. But I want to tell you the story of how I developed it. I developed the blend in 2013 in a man-to-man contest in Nicaragua with Manolo Quesada. And he told me I couldn't blend, and I told him I could, and we did a face-off, and I won. That's over-delivering on a story, and I tell that story every time I get. That's adding new authenticity, new credibility, things that humanize the experience. And frankly, that's also how we go to market. Not just going to the biggest stores with the biggest selections, but making sure that we're also in mom and pop shops, single store operators who will advocate for our business and tell our story in my absence. I think that's how we over deliver. And then finally, we have a portfolio that dates back to 1995. There are lots of blends on the market that go back to 1995. And premium cigars that are core are intended to be the same year after year after year. Now, certainly in the American market, that bar is very high. I recognize within the Cuban cigar market, there is more it's more accepted that you ebb and flow, that Monte Cristo for years was very strong, and Monte Cristo for then many years was mellower and creamier, and so you have this kind of journey. In the core of what the premium cigar industry is, that ebb and flow is not accepted. Core is meant to be core, and what it tasted like the first time, it should taste like the next time, and it should taste like the next time after that. I would challenge anyone to find a blend from 1995 that tastes as authentic as the Metropolitan, Connecticut, and Maduro. They truly taste like, as I said last night on an interview, these are classic blends that taste like new editions of the classic, meaning the story is exactly the same, but it's bound in a new book and on new paper. So you don't have to read an old dusty book that smells moldy like an attic. If premium cigars are done right, these are reissues of classics with every production. And when you read a classic, it's the same. It's exactly the same story, but it feels like it did the first time because you're reading it in a new edition of the classic. That's what core premium lines are all about. We over deliver on that because we spend more time maintaining our core rather than coming out with a new limited edition this and coming out with a new random brand that. We could do that if we wanted to, but then we're not over delivering on just maintaining a brand. And to over deliver, we have to make sure that it is perfect every time.
So how do you think the Metropolitan then, as you say there, is more or less like the Metropolitan from 95, with changes in crops and harvests and different weather and climate change and everything? How do you get that, in your opinion, that it is like 95? You know what I mean?
Yes, sir. It's not an easy process, but I'll give you my favorite analogy.
Yeah.
Phantom of the Opera is a tremendous musical that has existed since the 1980s and has been put on in countless theaters in countless countries. If in the spirit of being consistent, once Andrew Lloyd Webber cast that show in 1980, whatever, he never changed a thing. Today, Phantom of the Opera would be on oxygen and in wheelchairs. It would be a geriatric cast and the show would not be the same, right? Out of an overabundance of not changing a thing, it would ruin the show. And so how is it that Phantom of the Opera continues to be put on the same show every single night in multiple places? It's because you are thoughtfully casting the right people to play the right roles in the right way. And you do that with tobacco when you blend. So Metropolitan Connecticut, for example, is not these 4 seeds from these 3 farms in these 3 leaf positions put together in this particular way. Metropolitan is a light to medium bodied mouthfeel with a dominant woody characteristic, with creamy notes and a slightly acidic finish because of the wrapper. That is Metropolitan Connecticut. And that's the way it tasted in 1995. That's the way it tasted in 2011. And that's the way it tastes in 2002. So when you taste it, it doesn't taste like a 30-year-old cigar, because it's not. It's a 6-month-old cigar, but it is reissuing that classic experience and maintaining it in exactly the way you would recast a show to maintain a Broadway production, or you would reprint a classic novel.
Excellent. Brilliant answers there. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Many thanks for the answer. And I see Macy is shifting in his seat and cannot wait to ask his question and get on the show. Macy, welcome.
Can you see me and hear me? My condolences if so. I think, first of all, as one MH, Macy Hansen, to another, let me just first say hello, and it's a pleasure to...
What's your middle initial?
D for danger.
I've got an A for... Just kidding.
For abstinent, I've heard.
Yeah.
That's where I heard you were going to be a priest, and then no, maybe I heard. I don't know. I need to check.
That's someone else's interview, my friend.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, this does not count as my question, so you can make a note. This is not my question. Clear. Preface this. Your Charlie Sheen story is one of the greatest stories I've ever heard in my life, from anywhere and any person. Do you have any more like it? If so, will you share them? And if you can bookend it or have some time at the end, will you do the favor of sharing that story with everyone else? Not my question, but if you can get to, because that is a legendary yarn, good sir. Can't remember where I heard it, but my God, that's funny. Okay. First of all, I wish you luck, all that, very hopeful for you. I actually thought of you the other day. I threw away some. I had some Nat Sherman luxury cigarettes, and that actually made me think of you and said, I hope he's doing, I don't need them, don't need to inhale, so I'd better just to throw them away. Otherwise, I'll probably smoke them. Okay, so with all that being said, I actually dabble now in some pieces for Reinhard, and let me say, I've written some, and I'd appreciate if you read them. Some are about, we got a piece up on trademark litigation right now. I heard a cigar page refer to trademark litigation as the true sport of kings. I think that's true and funny. I hope you avoid that sport, good sir. I hope, well, I don't want to make a comment about Aganorsa Leaf, but I'll say it. I hope they don't come after you like they have others. But anyway, on to this. I am working on a piece now for Reinhard. We've been talking a lot on this lounge conceptually, and I think it's a perfect question for you and your artistic, erratic nature on concepts of vintage and other concepts of winemaking, of fine distilled spirits, luxury products, etc., versus kind of tradition or consistency, perhaps, is the other, platonic form on our continuum, if you will. So, and I'm a lover of Paul Garmirian. If people don't know who he is probably the best kept secret, I believe, in the business. He's stodgy and a curmudgeon, and I love it. But Garmirian's book, The Gourmet Guide to Cigars, I'll read from it. No trademark or copyright, just portions. It says he's talking about the connoisseur and different types of smokers. And the highest level being the connoisseur, and I think everyone on this lounge probably is there or close to it, saying, having discussed various types of selecting cigars for the beginner and intermediate smoker, we can now turn to the advanced smoker, the connoisseur. He says the cigar connoisseur seeks specific cigars after breakfast, after lunch, afternoon, after dinner, and sometimes late night after smoking. He or she, they could be constantly searching for subtle flavors and takes the maturity and aging of the cigar quite seriously. Before manufacture, cigar leaves pass through 3 stages, and it goes through fermentation. And also there's a great interview with Henke Kellner, who I think you probably know a little bit of. I think you've heard of him with your back. And HK is talking. He says, quote, "It is only," he probably has an accent actually, but "it is only possible to have a good blend with a good tobacco and a good inventory. Inventories must be classified by zones, areas of planting, vintage years, crops, and grading. One needs to have a profound knowledge and skill in order to have a good blend and to maintain it. If one has this skill, the only thing one lacks is the ability to foretell the impact that is produced by particular tobacco depending on the crop, the zones, and the grading, the weather, etc." So all that's a big windup to this question. How do you view that? Is consistency more important to you? Are there areas where concepts like vintage, allowing certain expressions to, like Davidoff, who you're associated with, is doing this discovery series, I think is pretty cool. Is that something, maybe you'll have your consistent lines and kind of an experimental side of what you're doing? So I'm interested in just hearing your thoughts, whatever comes to your mind on all of that. And I'll be quiet now. Thank you.
No, thank you. It's a great question. At its highest level, vintage is critical in the premium cigar world, but it's used generally in a very different way than wine, for example. Vintage to wine represents everything in the bottle. 100% is the expression of whatever God gave the winemaker and the vineyard manager bottled. In handmade premium cigars, vintage is important for the purposes of cataloging and understanding a specific tobacco's behavior. But generally speaking, there are not as a broad concept, this idea of vintage cigars, meaning everything is 100% same seed, same farm, same place. And that's because, honestly, it would be so linear and boring, it would be unsmokable. But vintage is important for cataloging experience because, back to Sai's question, the ability to maintain a blend is contingent on understanding everything about the vintage. Because if you're going to recast a tobacco that is leaving the show, vintage is one part of understanding the behavior and characteristics and nuances of a particular tobacco. So, for example, let's say I was using in this blend a 2017 Ligero from Top of the Plant, and from Nicaragua, from Esteli. And now I've run out of that specific 2017 Ligero Esteli. I need to replace it. Now, the first thing I would do is say, well, let's use the 2018 Ligero from Esteli. Except it rained a lot in 2018. And too much rain diminishes the strength even of Ligero, and it mutes it. So the 2018 Ligero may not be sufficient to replace the 2017. So let's go to 2019. That was a dry year like 2017. Except 2019 was too dry. It was drier and so much sun that Ligero is a face melter. But perhaps the Viso, lower position, younger, a little more ferocious, but a lower position, slightly thinner, shaded, that 2019 vintage might be exactly that satisfactory replacement for the 2017 Ligero. So vintage is critical. But that's drilling down to a level that frankly is meaningless, even to a connoisseur, because it's not shared. That's not information that's publicly shared. And when it is, it's often embellished. So then vintage really gets down to, what does it mean to a consumer? And so
within
then,
genetics, I find it's very hard you'll get region, or sometimes you'll get this seed. It's very hard. And sorry to interrupt, but as a consumer, well, first of all, we can't taste the component parts like folks in the factory can. but also just things like, we'll get a zone, let alone, microclimates there, but we don't often
But
get the
I would
zone and
also,
genetics.
the other thing is, first of all, genetics in leaf actually play very little. If you look at the actual genomic sequence of a leaf grown in Nicaragua and a leaf grown in Honduras and a leaf grown in Ecuador, and all three are Criollo 98, you're not going to be able to determine from a genomic standpoint that one has Honduran blood and one has Ecuadorian blood. You may be able to determine, in fact, it's Criollo 98, but as I understand it, as I've spoken to farmers and other folks, you don't develop that level of knowledge. And what's more important, again, going back to consistency and to Sai's point, sometimes the quest for consistency leads you to an inconsistent product. And the consistent part must be in the experience of the performance and not the consistency of the pedigree. And so we will launch products with disclosed details, but certainly those details have changed over time. And I can assure you, nobody is releasing a press release saying, hey, guess what? We changed the wrapper, guys, because in an effort to keep this consistent, we've totally changed the wrapper to keep it the same. If we did that, everyone would jump through hoops saying it's completely different, even though arguably it's precisely the same. So that doesn't happen. And because of that, we also learn to taste things that aren't actually attributed to the things that we believe they are, because the information may be dated or irrelevant. That's not a criticism, it's just the actuals of our business. So we have to be able to deal with vintage in terms of how it can positively affect us as consumers and specifically connoisseurs. And that really is focused solely on what happens in the aging process. And this is where because we are a non-vintage product, and back to the answer to Sai, because I'm over-delivering on consistency, that allows the connoisseur experience when it comes to vintage to really be dramatic and illuminating. If you take, for example, our portfolio of products, I started in 2011. I created Timeless Prestige in 11, Timeless Supreme in 2012. I saw someone hold up a Timeless Prestige earlier. The experience of that blend today in 2022 is precisely the way it performed in 2011 and 2012. Now, some of the characters have changed, but deliberately to make sure that the show is the same. But what that means is that you can find the Timeless Dominican that you bought in 2012. And even though the band may look different, maybe the wrapper has faded in your humidor, you cut that and you light it, you are tasting you are experiencing the show aged 12 years. Now, if we were talking wine, and today I opened up a bottle of 1997 Stag's Leap Cabernet Sauvignon, there is no way for me to know today where that bottle is relative to where it was in 2000 when it was released. I can't know. I have a good palate. I drink a lot of wine. I can guess, but I can't know because I can't travel back in time. So all I can do is drink it now, try to assess where it is today, and make a judgment call. Do I drink another one of these, or do I continue to keep it in the cellar? We have no ability to measure the value of aging because in wine, vintage is the vintage and that's it. But because we're non-vintage and because Ferio Tego over-delivers, when you go to the store tomorrow, you can pick up a Timeless Prestige. And next to your Timeless Dominican from 2012, you can enjoy those experiences side by side and determine first, how is this 10-year cigar, 2012. If you taste a 2012 Timeless next to a 2022 Timeless, you are able to determine what has happened in the last 10 years. You can smoke it new and you can smoke it aged. And despite the fact that the characters have changed, the show is the same. And so presumably the way they will age over time, the arc of that blend experience will be the same. And so vintage allows us to say, okay, this timeless prestige that's 10 years old, well, man, this has a much creamier character. A lot of the bright spiciness that I'm getting off the new one is gone, but it's still got all this body. It's still big in body. That's a great set of clues for you to say, okay, you know what? I'm going to buy 2 boxes of prestige and I'm going to put them in the bottom of my cabinet and I'm not opening them for 10 years. If I know this is where they're going to go and I like that, you have a benchmark. So that's where vintage really, really plays a role, is you can benchmark against manufacturing years and then taste against your aging with a new product from your local retailer and gauge for yourself what's benefiting, what's changing and what's not. And is it positive evolution or negative evolution? And you can gauge that for yourself. I think that's where vintage really plays an important role. Now, where I have personally tried to now carve out my unique corner in the sky here is with Ferio Tego, because we are embracing the wine model in Ferio Tego's Elegancia and Generoso. So imagine I'm speaking about wine, except I'm talking about cigars. We have 2 styles. We have an Elegancia and a Generoso. The Elegancia is a white. It's creamy. It's buttery, full-bodied, lots of toffee, popcorn, brioche, creme brulee. Those are all the flavors that you get in a mouth-fillingly full body of our white. Our red is the Generoso, which is much more decadent, earthy, old world, massively body, but still very, very balanced, still a creaminess, no tannin, no acid. So the smoke is soft despite how massive and dark those flavors are. That is Elegancia and Generoso. The 2021s have been released. The 2021s have also largely been exhausted. The 2022s we're hoping to launch at the end of this month. And our intention is to keep them largely the same, no different than a winemaker would be keeping the next vintage the same with whatever God gave them in the vineyard, but also understanding that there are some allowable unique attributes with each release, because the way we're maintaining Ferio Tego is different than maintaining an experience of core with every production. Ferio Tego, Elegancia, and Generoso are one production for the year, and they will go in and they will ultimately sell out. And some years they'll sell out far before the second year's release. Some years perhaps they'll overlap with the next year's release, but the year is made and the year is put out, and then the next year will follow. And when you smoke an Elegancia, no different than when you taste this Chardonnay from last year's Chardonnay, without tasting them next to each other, you'd probably say, oh yeah, this is exactly what I like. If you tasted them next to each other, you might say to yourself, this one's a little bit oaky, or this one's a little bit drier, or this one's got this unique nuance that is the expression of the 2017 vintage different than the 2016. Should you decide to collect Ferio Tego, which is very easy because Ferio Tego is packed in travel humidors, so you can activate the humidity and keep your collection outside of your typical humidor and age them outside of your humidor, then you have that advantage to do verticals and to taste those vintages as they go. But that is where we are strongly inspired by the wine industry and the concept of vintage, and mirroring and embracing the culture of collection and connoisseurship that has existed forever in the wine space, that really has not existed in the premium cigar space to such a formal extent.
Brilliant.
Unfortunately, I used up my Charlie Sheen story time, so you can actually watch that on El Oso Fumar, which is Bear Duplessis.
That's where I saw it.
His post PCA show from 2021. I went through the entirety of the Charlie Sheen story, and it's a good one.
It is exceptional.
Hey, Michael, can I ask you a question? Sure. What's the reality of consumers, everyday people like us, just being able to really age the cigar in your humidor, you know, whether you're using humidor packs or if you're actually using fluids to create your or manage your humidity. I mean, can you really age it in a standard box
Yes.
and then expect to see a result from that?
Yes. Here's what I think is very important.
Okay.
And I hope this doesn't disparage anybody. But again, in my mission to over deliver transparency and honesty, allow me to just simply say, if you have purchased a box of cigars and you've put them in your humidor for 3 months and you believe they are better, they're not. Realistically, the minimum amount of time for real discernible development, in my experience, is about 5 years. I think that's really where you can age something 5 years and then pick up the original and smoke them side by side and see. Now, there's a couple things to consider. Generally, the closer you get to maintaining that 70% humidity, and also the closer you get to 70 degrees, the more change that will occur in that shorter period of time, which can be better or worse. The cooler and drier you keep your cigars, the less obvious change occurs over time. Not unlike wine, for example. So if you're keeping big red wines at white wine temperatures, you will find that, let's say you had a monster bottle of Cab and one you kept at 68 degrees and one you kept at 55 degrees, and you opened both of those bottles 10 years later, you will find that the one kept warmer will have changed much more dramatically than the one kept colder. And so very similar things apply in cigars, which is why when you go to aging rooms for inventory in cigar factories, they are very, very cold, because that is maintaining inventory for the market. And so we're trying to preserve that new experience. And so they're kept quite cold. So if you're talking about a humidor in an average apartment or dining room, you've got some ebb and flow, let's say, of that ambient temperature, but probably somewhere around that 70-degree mark. And most of us like to do I like to use 69% humipacks. I have found over time that there is absolute evolution in those cigars post 5 years. But the other thing I think is important is you have to ask yourself, what is the base that you're changing? So I ask this question all the time. Show of hands for everyone on the panel, who has enjoyed a wine that was older than 20 years old? Okay, probably a handful have. How many of those wines were Pinot Grigio? 0. Pinot Grigio does not have the capacity to age and get better 20 years in time. You may have loved the Pinot Grigio, but you probably did not love a Pinot Grigio from 1992 or 2002 in 2022. It doesn't have the capacity to develop. It doesn't have the base. But if it was a big Cab or it was a Chardonnay, then you're talking about a wine that has a body that can withstand that type of aging, and then has measurable and discernible favorable changes. So if you have, like, I'll tell you, the first cigars I ever aged, just because I didn't want to smoke them, were the first Opus I ever owned. You know, I went out, I waited till the day I could get them. I smoked one, I bought another one. I still have it sitting upstairs. You know, there's something, I look at it. It's worth more to me looking at it than smoking it at this point. But certainly after 5 years, there would have started to have been discernible change in that cigar. And that was at the time only in a desktop. But aging is really, you need a vessel that can be controlled, and Tupperware, Ziploc bag, all of that is effective. As long as your temperature is maintained and your humidity is maintained, the vessel is actually inconsequential. The only time it really becomes consequential is, in fact, if it is cedar, or if you have your cigars in a box with no cellophane and the box is cedar. I find that long-term aging in cedar, for me, is a negative. because these cigars end up taking on so much of that cedar quality. I find it to be unbearable. And I smoked a Partagas 150 from 1995, 1996. That was so cedary I couldn't smoke it. I smoked the 1983 Davidoff Haut-Brion that was unforgivingly cedary because it was aged in its box, and it lost any of the unique character and attributes of the actual tobacco itself, because it had just absorbed this cedar nuance for years. So now again, that's personal preference. If you want the cedar there, put it there. But my personal philosophy is the manufacturer spent an inordinate amount of time making this right. If the cigar is wrapped in cedar, manufacturer wants cedar to be a part of it. If the cigar is not wrapped in cedar, I'm not doing anything to change that manufacturer's intention.
Perfect. All right. Yeah. Helpful. Thank you.
Sure thing.
Many thanks, David, and excellent explanation, Michael. Many thanks for that. The only thing I might have to say, and it probably goes back a little bit to what you explained earlier about seed varietals and their genetics and how they probably do not play as an important a role as the way they're being processed. I think the same could be true for a Pinot Grigio. Like there's tremendously full-bodied, rich, almost Burgundy-esque Pinot Grigios,
of course,
from Austria, where the way they're being processed and handled probably makes them a beautiful wine to be aged. And I think it beautifully goes back to what you actually said about the seed varietals. That's why I wanted to bring it up.
Well, yes, by no means was I trying to be offensive to Pinot, because I love Pinot Grigio, by the way. So it had nothing to do with Pinot Grigio. What I meant to say, or let me say it more clearly, you have to assess the base before you can assess its capacity for change. And to your point, you cannot assess that without tasting it. So just because a cigar is light wrapped, for example, Sterling has profound capacity to age over time because of the ingredients and the body present. Same with Elegancia. So you're absolutely right. It was purely to make a very easy analysis. But yes, Reinhard, you are absolutely correct.
And you are, of course, spot on with the way a lot of people perceive Pinot Grigio because of its particular style that is very prominent, for example, in the US, where you find a particular style of Pinot Grigio on most wine menus. And I just thought it's a cool analogy. Over to Ian, who had a question for the longest time.
Really enjoying the conversation. Following on your discussion about brands and consumers wanting consistency, I mean, I suppose that they say they do, but I enjoy a cigar because I enjoy that particular cigar. And I know with to certain brands that I'm going to enjoy them, or I will just be interested to taste them, even if they don't taste exactly the same as the previous one that I had. So I think the importance for a brand is to get consistent, good quality. I don't mind if it's a bit different from one year to the next, in the same way as we talked about wine. I don't expect a particular wine to taste the same this year as the one from 3 years ago.
Ian, just a question. When you think to the examples in your mind that you're referring to, the brands and cigars that you love, that you accept the fact that there are some allowable changes year to year.
Yeah.
Are those predominantly Cuban-made cigars?
No. I mean, I don't smoke that many Cubans nowadays. I smoke mainly Nicaraguan, I suppose. You know, I don't mind if they taste a bit different, provided they're good quality. So, you know, if I have an Oliva Serie V, which is one of my favorite cigars, and I've been buying them for the last 5 years, you know, I'm quite the last one, even in the same box, if it tastes a bit different, because there's an infinite variety of conditions. I mean, you know, as the previous question was saying, you can't control the you know, there's the circumstances. Everybody's humidor was going to be different, where it's kept, what the temperature is, the fluctuations and so on, whether it's kept dry, whether it's kept. So I'm not sure that I would agree that, you know, you can just say, well, you know, the 2002 and the 2012, that'll show what it'll be like from 2012 to 2022. I don't think that's necessarily the case. It might be, But what I like to do, certainly with things like wine, is to buy a case or buy a box of cigars and then taste them over time, see how they develop. Because one of the worst things you can do, certainly with wine, is to put this wine away in your cellar, forget about it. Then you come to it and you think, right, this is just past its best. I better drink it up very fast because it's not going to get any better. Now, I don't know. I suspect cigars may be the same up to a point there. You know, some cigars you should smoke them young. Some will age for 20 years. Some won't age for 20 years. And you could waste your money if you buy a box cover. Well, actually, I should have smoked these 10 years ago because they're well past their best. But as I said, I think for a brand, focus on the quality. I know people say they want the same, but I mean, I like a lot of consumers. I've been smoking a lot of cigars, but you give me a cigar, I can't tell you what's in the cigar. I can't even tell you what leaf I've got. I've got an underground now. I don't know what's in that. I'm enjoying it. I don't really care what's in it. I just care that it's been well made, well rolled, and it's got good tobacco. So, that's my two penneth.
I wish there were more consumers like you. But I think your point about aging actually is spot on, Ian. And I suppose that goes also back to my clarification with Reinhardt also, that it's not an exact science, of course, that a box of 2002 and what that became in 2012 and smoking it against the new one and then aging that another 10, of course, it's not an exact science, but it is at least indicative of what may be. It gives you a snapshot into what is probably more than likely going to occur in the future, because you're able to compare, if not exact apples to apples, something close enough where you just don't have that experience with wine.
I mean, I would speculate. I don't know, but as you were saying, sometimes you have to change the blend so it stays the same. But that's on the initial taste for people when they're
right.
out of the box. Now, because you've changed the blend, the different constituent parts of it may change differently over 5-10 years than the previous quotes identical brand, just because it is a different cigar and it's going to age differently. Doesn't mean it's good or bad. You may get a pleasant surprise. I mean, one of the things I enjoy is trying something and, oh my goodness, this is suddenly really very good. I've had that with a cheap bottle of wine, which, my goodness, this is, this punches way above its price. I've had other expensive wines, which I think, well, actually, that's not really worth the money I paid for it. So,
I absolutely agree. I'll tell you, part of what has been so interesting about my experience since 2000, let's use that 2011, 2012 date, is these are all blends that I created from scratch, maintained over time, and now 3 times have had to start over and create from scratch again. I did it in 2018 in some rebrand work, and then I did it again now in 2021 with Ferio Tego. And as you mentioned, the ingredients are not the same, but fortunately I have cigars from nearly every blend and almost every production year. And so it's actually been quite a fun exercise to do these kind of verticals and to go back and smoke from my original prototypes in 2011 through some of the blend maintenance blends in 2013-14 that I have, the 2017-2018 rebrand blends. And now, as we were redeveloping these blends in 2022, it's been interesting just to kind of track using the Prestige, for example, as a base blend, that despite how those constituents, to your point, have evolved as far as the characters we are casting to play the right roles in the show, they are, in fact, at least in the case of Prestige, kind of aging on track, following a very similar trajectory of going from spicy to more round and creamy and velvety. It's been actually personally a very interesting experience to taste through that stuff.
Thank you.
Speaking of fashion trends and evolution and keeping track of things over time, I briefly want to talk about garments, Michael. By the way, next week we will be hosting a very exciting show about the history of the smoking jacket with Stefano Ricci and their head of business development, Laurent Negrin, and his connections to the cigar industry and the Fuente family. You are rightfully considered one of the, if not the best dressed gentlemen in the cigar industry. When you look back at the history of how industry professionals dress up, present themselves, there were suits and ties, guayaberas, then at some point tattoos, t-shirts, and flip-flops crept into the picture. What do you think does that tell us about the evolution of the industry as a whole, about changing trends and fashion?
I don't think the industry can be measured in the evolution of the fashion of its owners. I think what that speaks to is the evolution of the personalities who fall in love with the industry. I mean, let's start at the beginning. The only people fortunate enough to be leaders or principals in the U.S. industry were largely those with origins from the Caribbean or Latin American countries, with the exception of perhaps the Newmans, the Shermans, Davidoff, of course. You have some other pedigree, but largely you had a pedigree that was authentically rooted in a particular culture, and that authenticity was expressed in the way they dressed. As you look at the evolution of the American market, it became more and more civilized. It became bigger. It needed infrastructure. It needed more and more employees. Those employees were coming from an American base. And so, of course, you start adapting the style of the people that you employ. And at the same time, of course, the industry is growing with a certain consumer base that at that time probably had a certain means, because the spectrum of availability of that category was rather limited. If you look at the scale of what a premium cigar cost, let's say in the 1950s, of course, they seem inexpensive today. But if you compare that as a percentage to what people made, perhaps they weren't that inexpensive at all. But nevertheless, you're talking about just the circumstances of the actuals. If we look at today, we are looking at the circumstances of the actuals. And as more and more people discovered a passion for this, more and more people have gone all in and decided, I don't want to be a bass player anymore like Pete Johnson. I don't want to be a drummer anymore like me. We've found something else to do. Now, I'm a different breed because the circumstances of my actuals was development in New York City and working for Davidoff. So, of course, my circumstances were bred in a jacket and a shirt and a tie on Madison Avenue. Pete Johnson was bred in LA, in rock bands. And so he is a product of his circumstances that is so and completely authentic to him. The same with Matt Booth, but the same with the Newmans, who were brought up by their father and their grandfather, who said, you wear a shirt and tie to the office every day. So did the Shermans. So did Zeno Davidoff. And so I think we're all products of the authenticity of our circumstances. But I'll tell you what I think is so incredible, and I always love sharing this, but if I were to name like two of my closest friends, and this really is not an exaggeration, we talk all the time, is Pete Johnson and Matt Booth. I mean, with regularity, weekly, we're texting each other and staying in touch and helping each other out, and we're thinking partners, and we're trusted advocates for each other. And people will say to me, well, why don't you lose the suit? Now you don't work for anybody. You don't have to wear a shirt and tie every day. And my answer to that is, that's like telling Pete to lose the tats. Like he doesn't cover himself in tattoos to sell more cigars. The tattoos are Pete Johnson. The people that relate to him relate to all of him. And I know a lot of guys that wear suits and work on Madison Avenue that smoke peach cigars. Doesn't mean that they need to cover themselves in tats, but it's part of the authenticity of that person's character. And for me, part of my development as a person, as a character, you know, whatever role it is that I play in the cigar world, part of my authenticity has become making sure that my shirt has a collar on it and I throw a jacket on when I'm gonna be in front of people. I certainly don't wear a collared shirt and a jacket, you know, at my daughter's t-ball game, because then that's inauthentic. Then that's extreme. It's forced. Again, I try to just over deliver on my transparency and authenticity. If we're gonna have a meeting, you all are gonna respect me with your time. I'm gonna put on a collared shirt and a jacket. Now, I'm not wearing any pants, but I'm, you know, you only see from here up, so that doesn't really matter. But nevertheless, the important part is that I'm evoking that admiration and respect. No, you know, it is purely, I think, the evolution of the industry in its totality. You have consumers who never thought they would be accepted in what was always perceived as a white guy Wall Street thing to do in 1980, and that doesn't exist anymore. And so then, well, then it's not in this alternative culture. Well, actually it is. And well, it's not in a rock and roll culture. Well, actually it is. Well, it's not in the highest level of connoisseur. Well, actually it is. I mean, you know, we just continue to evolve and evolve and evolve. And that's what makes our industry not only incredible, it's also what makes this industry inimitable. There is not another hobby that can be as vast and wide as this category, and yet somehow everybody involved can immediately feel a level of kinship just by smelling the aroma of someone's cigar from a park bench. We've all experienced it. You can't walk up to a random guy who's got a Yankees hat on and ask him a question without him being like, who are you? But dollars to donuts, you can be in any city in the world, and if you walk up on a guy on a bench smoking a cigar and you say, hey, what are you smoking? That's it. You are fast friends. You want to know where to eat? That guy's going to tell you. You want to know where to drink? That guy's going to tell you. You want to know where to get tickets? That guy's going to tell you, because you relate on a level that is so intimate, because it is so misunderstood by such a profound majority that for the very few of us that get this, this is the key to the hidden world. And when you have this magic token, you're in no matter where you are. And so whether your tattoos or long hair or white or gay or a gorilla or whatever you are, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. When you've got this, we're all family. And that's how this industry has evolved. And style as a result.
Amen to that. Just a very quick follow-up. I love the authenticity aspect, and I think that's what it all boils down to. Secondly, we briefly discussed on last week's shows, and I just wanted to follow up on that. Do you think that ultimately those variances and that diversity, though, is reflected in the actual cigar experience that those people and their brands will ultimately convey?
Ask me that differently.
Do you think that the style, the fashion, the way that certain people behave and just, you know, present themselves, is that reflected in the way they blend cigars and the way the actual smoking experience is being delivered?
That's a very good question. I think the answer is much closer to yes today than it would have been years ago, because years ago, people felt compelled to dress a certain way because it was accepted. But you were talking about after the original advent of, let's say, the familial ancestors of industry, you then had probably a whole generation of just business professionals who climbed ranks in sort of corporate structure. But now you have this new advent over the last 20 or 30 years of passionate people entering the industry authentically. And so when you look at the Pete's or the Matts or Nick Melillo or Dion Giolotto or any number, Andre from Andre Farkas, I tend to see a little bit more of that transparency in that you see the brand through the person, you see the person through the brand. There is a bit more of that kind of opacity between the person, the brand, and the experience of it. So, for example, if I look at, and I don't think it was deliberate necessarily, but it is certainly intentional now. If you look at the opus of my work, in all of the, I didn't say opus, I'll get sued for that, not the opus. If you look at the portfolio of my work, we have blends from all three countries. I see that as very diverse. We have Sterling in Timeless and we have Panamericana in Timeless. Those are radically different. Even in Ferio Tego, Elegancia and Generoso is apples and bowling balls. They couldn't be more different. And yet throughout all of them, they in fact do share a certain elegance and gracefulness in their body. That is certainly a reflection of my palate and the way I approach products and things I like. It's also an affect of the other things I enjoy, the way I like to eat, the things I like to drink. My palate is a condition of all those things, and therefore I create things that my palate is obviously drawn to. In fact, when we do collaborative tastings to try and get wider opinions, oftentimes other blends tend to take a majority, and I struggle to decide whether to agree and go in that direction or whether I pull back to mine. Obviously, I'm an egomaniac, so I pull back to mine and I just say, hey, let's live with this. And if it fails, it falls on me. But there is something to be said for the that common thread. And so I don't know if there is a common thread of elegance with me when I'm wearing a t-shirt and shorts at my kids' softball game, but there probably is. There probably is something there that is just kind of very specific about my personality, that regardless of whether I'm in a suit or whether I'm in shorts and a t-shirt, that is just consistent. And I think that's probably apparent in my work. And I think as more and more passionate artists are making premium cigars their medium, there tends to be that signature that probably the artist doesn't realize they're applying in every piece. But to connoisseurs, to collectors, you look at our work and judge it in a very different way. Just like the way you can look at a Monet and say, oh, that's a Monet. Monet probably wasn't doing, oh, I got to make sure I do these swirly things so that 3,000 years from now they're going to know it's mine. It's just the style, it's the medium, and that's become a signature. And I think largely now with more and more real creative artists getting involved on the creative aspect of this great industry, as this becomes more the medium, I think we'll see more of that signature and style in the creative work.
Excellent answer. We just had another gentleman joining us here on the panel who I'm pretty sure might want to add a few cents and a few words to garment, gentleman style, and everything that we just discussed. Jeremiah, you want to join us for a brief second? Now, maybe he's a little shy now, hiding in the back.
We know that's not true.
Conversation. In any case, he had very nice words for you, Michael, when Jeremiah was commenting over on Facebook, calling you a class act and that he loves everything about you and what you do.
That's awfully kind, and I feel the same.
So maybe he wants to chime in and join. Let's hand the microphone to Ryan for a brief moment there. He wanted to ask or comment.
Hey everyone, how's it going?
Good to see you, Ryan.
Yo, is Michael. How are you? Good to
Good
see
to see
you.
you. I think you just muted yourself.
I think I just muted myself. I'm sorry about that. There we are. We're back again. So it's good to see you again. And my question is a bit of a personal one, and bear with me because it just has a bit of a story, and then the question would kick in. About 5 years ago was the first time we made it to IPCPR at the time. And I think our meeting with you was the second meeting that we had. And I don't know if you were having a bad day or something like that. We just came to speak to you. You were standing up. You were not in the best of moods, and you shellacked us. We were telling you about what we're doing and all of that stuff. And the meeting did not go well at all, And we were trying very hard to talk about working with you and all of that stuff, but it just did not go well. And I remember myself and Abdul walked out of that meeting and we're like, well, that went very well. And what was interesting is we were horrified when we got into IPCPR for the first time. We were just getting into the industry. We loved it, but it was very difficult. We were literally in a club that we are literally not members of. And that, I have to admit, I have to give you credit for, gave us a big push in that thing. And so we changed our style, we changed our approach, and it ended up being a very successful event for us. Fast forward you going through the shift and the change that you've actually experienced. I'd love to hear from you about the whole process of the rebirth process and having to go through the process again and starting again. And excuse me if you spoke about that because I joined late. That's one thing. And the second thing is I find it very interesting that your shift or your change or your rebirth process was a kind of a hybrid in the sense that you've recreated a new brand, yet you've decided to continue existing lines. And with the kind of experience you had, you would think that you would start everything by you saying, in the different ways that you described yourself, I can do this. I have the experience. I'm going to start something out of scratch and it's going to be unbelievable. And I know it's going to be unbelievable. So I'm curious. And I love, one of the things I love in this industry, I love the cigars, but I love the stories that comes with it. There's so much to learn from the experiences of people. If you're a very, person that listens and you're very humble about the experiences of other people, you have so much to learn. And I'm very curious about these things. And I'm sorry if it was a bit of a long question. And I want to end that by saying, dude, we got to have your cigars in Dubai. So let's get this happening.
Well, my recollection of our first meeting was not as negative as yours. So maybe I was tired. I also think it was 2017. And I believe that was the first trade show post-acquisition by Altria. And if memory serves, part of, I think the reason it may have felt like a shellacking was because we had just received a shellacking in that we were told we can't even entertain the idea of international business. And that was right after I had attended Dortmund and started spending time trying to develop an international strategy. So it may have just been salt on a wound because I couldn't engage it. And so I apologize profusely. But I do remember the next time I saw you, hugging you and having a great conversation. So I'm really glad that it didn't completely destroy your opinion of me. And I'm thrilled that you're still interested in hopefully doing some business together. The story of the evolution is of Nat Sherman closing and Ferio Tego forming and now moving forward is a very long one. And so I want to be thoughtful about everyone's time. But I've gone into that on a number of other interviews. And so I also don't want to be too repetitive if people have already heard it. But let me say from just a high level, part of the catharsis of the way we went out of business was knowing that the brands were not going to continue. That was clear in the acquisition model that we were trying to develop as Altria selling the brands, that we weren't selling the brands, we were selling the business. We were not going to sell the brands independent of the business. And so that meant that when we failed to successfully sell the business because of COVID, well, that was cathartic in that at least I knew together collectively we would put the period at the end of the sentence and close the book. However, it became apparent after a month or so that there was so much interest, no surprise, in people continuing to want to try and pick at the bones and still buy the brands, that the company was compelled to entertain those offers. And once we realized that they were considering offers, that became a profoundly emotional moment for me. Because the reality is the brands weren't mine, but the work was. And the idea that Timeless could live on under someone else's ownership, that all the work we did to build up and maintain and preserve this wonderful brand could potentially, in the wrong hands 20 years from now, be viewed at in negative light. It was an indescribable feeling emotionally. And so I had a very emotional reaction, which was to reach out and say, if in fact there is consideration to sell these brands and continue the work, then I would like consideration and to put in an offer. And so I called the CFO, who we've been working closely together and obviously in close touch with our future plans. Ferio Tego was already a plan for me as a small boutique limited line. And I told him my plans for Ferio and said, there may be an opportunity to buy these brands. We have one shot to do it. Let's do it. And we put together a plea for consideration while we put together an offer. Then we put together an offer. And about 10 days later, we received the word that our offer was the one that would ultimately win and that we would be able to acquire the brands back. That was not plan A, that was plan B. And but that changed then the model. Ferio Tego was going to be a slow roll idea, small and intimate and banging on doors. Instead, we had just acquired an enterprise level portfolio and we had no money left. So now we had to figure out, well, how are we going to stand up 9 blends when it's just 2 people and we have no infrastructure? And that's when our partners really came into play, meaning our manufacturing partners, because we went back to every factory and said, okay, good news and bad news. The bad news, as you know, Nat Sherman didn't sell. The good news is we just successfully bought all the brands back. And this was December that we told them. So all the factories were preparing to close for the holiday break. And we said, just please don't throw anything away. Obviously, there's no cigars left, but just let's wait and we'll regroup in January and we'll come up with a plan. And so collectively, we came up with a plan and we asked for them to start making cigars. And we asked the printing company to start making bands. And we asked everyone to get to work. And incredibly, all of the partners said, don't worry about a deposit. Don't worry about money. You pay us after you sell your first order because we believe in this and we know it's going to work. And so no problem. We're just going to do it. So as they got to work in that time, we started looking for fulfillment solutions and talking to our manufacturing partners along the way. And as it turns out, Davidoff was one of our manufacturing partners. And so when we said to Davidoff that we were looking at lots of various distribution solutions, they said to us, well, why don't you consider us as a distribution solution? And so as we explored that adjacent to the others, it became very apparent that that was a synergy that was incredible. I had worked for Davidoff for 9 years, then subsequently moved directly into working with Davidoff for the next 9 years in manufacturing. And so it was nearly a 20-year ongoing relationship of working together. And it was very clear that incorporating Ferio Tego into the Davidoff portfolio would be a meaningful relationship for both of us. And so fast forward, then we now had to ask our manufacturing partners, well, instead of those first orders that we told you we'd need for Brendon and Michael to try and sell, we are now going to be integrated into the Davidoff USA portfolio. And so our forecast of trying to get into maybe 100 stores in a calendar year is going to be exponentially higher, although we don't know what. And so together we were able to do forecasting with Davidoff and place reasonable orders with the factories. But understand, in 2021 January, no factory was looking for more manufacturing. every factory was already at capacity. But we placed our orders in January and we had our inventory in October. The only way that occurs is that every single manufacturing partner, from Cigar Rings in Dominican Republic, Humidiv Group, making our travel humidors for Ferio Tego, and Davidoff Quesada and Davidoff Camacho, all put Ferio Tego in the front of the line to make sure that our products were made and aged and delivered within the 2021 calendar year, and we launched in October 21. So it is indeed a hybrid. And we were very clear in our acquisition model that Nat Sherman was not a part of our model moving forward. We were cutting that line very clearly, that Metropolitan and Timeless, though historically were sold by Nat Sherman International, are moving forward under a new legacy, and that legacy is Ferio Tego. And we've been steadfast in that approach from the moment we started talking about Ferio, before we even launched. So that hybrid model has served us well, but it also offers some opportunity for some confusion for those who only knew these brands as Nat Sherman. But that confusion offers endless opportunity for clarification and conversation. And I love nothing more than the ability to have those conversations over and over and over again, where we can proudly talk about the pedigree and history of Nat Sherman International, but really get to the story at hand, that we closed that book. And I was there to put the period at the end of the sentence and close the book. And that book will forever be on the history books, on the shelves for everyone to read, and fondly. But now we are authoring a new book. This isn't the third or fourth chapter of Nat Sherman's story. This is the first chapter of the Ferio Tego story, and it's going to be a long story, and there will be many, many chapters. And so that's the way we think of it, right? Is we are authoring this new book, and we're moving forward with some obviously shared philosophies and ethos, but also some new ones, some that are authentically Michael Herklots and Brendon Scott, that perhaps weren't exactly the same as shared by the Shermans or Altria for that matter. But thank God we've been able to have the support from manufacturers, the support from retailers, and advocacy from consumers all together. And for that point, my competition from fellow brand owners and from other manufacturers that we don't manufacture with, the genuine groundswell of enthusiasm and support for Ferio Tego has really been as unprecedented as Ferio Tego itself. That we are now a year and a half old company. We are in market 8 months, and we have 9 blends, 42 SKUs, 2 limited editions, and we're in almost 800 stores sold throughout the United States, represented by Davidoff USA. Everything about that is completely authentic and unique to our story. So in some cases we had an advantage. In other cases, that advantage became a profound challenge, because now we had to prop up enterprise, not start up a startup. That was not plan A. But nevertheless, because we've surrounded ourselves with great people and people who we trust, and that trust is reciprocal and mutual because it has been demonstrated and proven over nearly a decade or more. Ferio Tego is a product of all of that. I hope that answers your question, because it was very, very long, but I hope it gets to what you were looking for. And I see Macy, who asked here, who are the financial backers? You're looking at them. It was myself and my partner, Brendon. We went together. We went all in. We put our chips in the table with the blessing of our wives. And, you know, if you're going to put your name on something, both of us have spent years working for it. We've spent the entirety of our careers working for other people. He on the finance side, but me on the premium cigar side. And you know, everyone, especially people who have ownership in this, immediately think that ownership comes with expertise, and then it comes with opinions. And the reality is, having dealt with diversity of opinions for 20 years, if it's going to have my family crest on it, we're going to limit that level of opinion to principals only, and that's Brendon and I. So we are all in, and thank God we're successful.
That's
Michael,
thank
you
you
hear
for
me?
Hey,
this.
Jeremiah. By the way,
Hey, brother, how you doing? I was trying
Jeremiah.
to log on.
The other financial backers, equally important, are our retail partners who are buying our products and consumers who are buying our products. Those ultimately are our financial backers. Those are our partners, the real partners who are invested every single time you reach into your pocket and spend money on Ferio Tego. Those are our long-term backers. Sorry, Jeremiah, go ahead. You were going to say all kinds of nice things about me.
I saw you were coming on the show tonight, and I was trying to figure out how to log on to this fucking thing, but I think I'm on now.
You're on.
I have to say, Michael, you're a gentleman. I adore what you're doing. I find everything you're doing beautiful, incredible, inspiring. It's beautiful to have young people in the industry going forward. I'm reassured that there's somebody from my generation who is in the industry and who I can relate with. And also, but there's one thing that you and I have to learn, both of us. We need to talk to Joey Bianco to teach us how to dress. Because let me tell you something, Joey, you got to tell us what kind of tailor you're using.
Hey, that's true. Trying to find something in my size, damn near impossible.
I will tell you a great story. I saw Joey in Florida, and I was more casual, and Joey showed up dressed to the T, and I said, my man, from now on, we need to connect before we see each other, because when you show up someplace dressed better than I, that is a real problem. And to his credit, I got a text message about an hour before I came on the air, and he said, hey, just curious, what are you wearing on the show tonight? I want to make sure I'm not overdoing it. So I said, Joey, you do you, bro. And he said, white pinstripes it is, and white pinstripes it is. So well done, my friend.
The respectful gangster. Listen, I don't want to take up your time, but I just wanted to come on and show you and the world the respect that I have for you and for what you do. And I really look forward to seeing you and to giving you a huge hug at the PCA in a couple of weeks.
I can't wait.
All right, my friend, take care of yourself. And big
Thanks.
kiss to everybody tonight. Bye.
Thank you.
Joey, be kind.
Thank you so much.
I'll try my best.
And Michael, I promised myself we'll try to be most respectful of your time and not take up too much of your day. I did the terrible job at that and completely messed up. We're 2 hours almost. I would love to give him and also Brian a quick opportunity to say hello, and they might have a quick question for you. So gentlemen, please chime in. And then Michael, as I said, we want to be most respectful of your treasured time, and it's so great to have you on the show. Time flies. It's incredible.
Hey, what's up, Michael? It's Justin. I just wanted to say first, I love your the way that you have created Ferio Tego, and most importantly, like your love of jazz music. So I was going to ask you a question, and I had to write it down. It's like cigars as a mean of artistic expression. Like I know Reinhardt kind of stole my question that I had, in that every owner seems to express themselves through the leaf. And I was wondering if you had a comment on how you take that kind of your musical history and kind of fuse it into the leaf, into the cigars that you make, and into your branding as well. And I love your cigars.
I appreciate your advocacy on social, always engaging and posting. I mean, let me just say before I answer your question, I actually just posted a video about this from a comment I made last night on Coop's show. We live in a time today where we only amplify and post and embrace things that we think people are going to give us the feedback we want. Everything is so judgmental today that we eat, drink, smoke, travel, dress every day, but we only take the pictures and post the ones that we think are going to get the most comments, the most likes, the most rah-rahs, right? Let me tell you something, as a brand owner, there is nothing more valuable than the authentic endorsement of a consumer. And the generosity and advocacy that you show when you take a photo and you bother to post it and tag it with anything favorable. Frankly, even if you say it sucks, the fact that it means that much to you, that it gives you the conviction to want to post it, I have to say that it's a game changer. And what I would ask for all of you is for your consideration that when you pick up that cigar that you have now invested in, you are now an invested financial backer in Ferio Tego. What would you do as a financial backer if you had skin in the game? You would want that brand to grow. And I would ask all of you to feel like this brand is as much yours as it is ours, and be proud of it and amplify it and take pictures and post it and brag about it, because I feel like these brands are worthy of bragging, and I think you do too. And it's just that one extra step, and it would mean the world to me that you do that. As it relates to jazz, I was having an interview with Christian McBride during COVID, and Christian is one of the greatest jazz bassists of our time, and it's on my Instagram. You can go back and watch it. And we were talking about jazz and cigars and tobacco and how unique it is, and I had this kind of epiphany, and I've shared it a couple times, but I'll share it with the room. And I actually was kind of hinting at it earlier. Jazz is to music what premium cigars is to tobacco, in that this idea of music in its totality, lots of people think they understand, and lots of people use music for lots of different reasons and consume music. Well, lots of people think they understand what tobacco is, and lots of people consume tobacco. And most people think that tobacco is these 4 or 5 specific things within the tobacco space that makes up the majority of the tobacco industry, a lot like music, country, pop, hip hop, whatever. And then you've got jazz and you've got premium cigars, both of which goes back to, it is a language that very few of us speak. And so it is misunderstood by the majority. The example I gave was, to an untrained ear, if you turn on jazz and it just happens to be John Coltrane soloing, the majority of people would say, this saxophonist is having a stroke and I'm going to find something else to listen to. But to a trained ear, they can listen for 9 seconds and say, oh shit, this is the 3rd chorus in Giant Steps. I know exactly what this is. I know the changes, or you at least know it's a blues and you're waiting to hear what's happening. You understand the language, and that gives a profound respect and admiration, not just for the music and the culture, but the work and the artistry it takes. There is not a jazz musician on the planet that will make as much as the most successful pop artists or hip hop artists. There's plenty of very successful, very wealthy jazz musicians, but it's still always going to be on a lower scale. And the same in premium cigar world. When you walk down the street, someone smells a cigarette, they think in their head that's a cigarette. You smell pot, you think in your head that's pot. Someone smells a cigar and they say, oh my God, who's smoking a cigar, right? Now we walk down the street and we smell cigarettes and we're like, ah, cigarettes, pot, ah. We smell a cigar and we're like, yo, where's this dude at? Hold on. I smell it, but I got to find this dude. There he is. I see him. He's hiding it over there in the corner. Yo, what are you smoking, bro? Where'd you get that? That's it. It's kinship. It's kinship. And it's just like jazz. But when it comes to creating music, when you write pop, when you create any music, no one writes music or creates art to just be okay. I think every artist finds themselves paralyzed in the pursuit of perfection, and then at some point you have to let it go. But you're talking about a consumer base that has developed such a profound level of connoisseurship that they often have a higher level of criticism. And you know, the greatest art critics are called critics for a reason. Music, you don't have music critics, you have jazz critics. People aren't necessarily criticizing pop or hip, they're covering it, but it's always critic relative to the most profound and difficult arts, food and culinary and performing arts and jazz. It's always to a critical ear. And the same goes for premium cigars. We're creating art for what is already a critical palate. And so that paralysis of perfection is probably far greater than one may have if they are developing a different type of tobacco product. I would imagine. I've never developed another type of tobacco product. But the intention is different. It's infinitely more work for significantly less volume, immeasurably less volume. It's not even a rounding error to their volume. And yet it takes so much more work and effort to develop and create and then maintain and preserve. And so as an artist, you write your best work and then you perform it. And you hope that it resonates. And sometimes it does, but a lot of times you will never get the response that you hope for. You know, you put something out and then you go back and look and you refresh the next day and you refresh the next day. And, you know, even if it's all great as an artist, you know, you expect everything to stop and for the world to stand up and applaud and say, this is the masterpiece we've been waiting for. And the reality is that doesn't happen. And it's that kind of up and down, ebb and flow emotionally as a creative artist that I'm certainly subject to when we're creating premium cigars. And so that goes back to how we started this conversation early, which I don't think you were on for, which is, I create for me. I have to believe it's my best work and hope that people see it and find it. And if they don't agree it's my best work, hopefully they appreciate for what it is within the arc of my story. If they don't think it's the best premium cigar experience that they've ever had, hopefully they still appreciate it, that it is a great premium cigar experience that maybe is better for someone else. But as a creative artist, it will forever and always be the curse of looking for recognition and applause, right? You always wait for the applause at the end of a show. And in this case, there is no applause. In this case, you have to wait and you have to see what happens. It's like releasing an album instead of doing a live show. Doing something like this is a concert. I do this and I see eyes and I see people engaged and I can see if people are liking the show or not. And it seems like some of you are, and maybe a few of you are not, and that's perfectly fine too. Okay, one of you might be, but you know, like that's the way it goes. But you play to an audience, right? And that changes that performance, and it feels different for everybody when it's live. But when you create it and you memorialize it, and then you just put it out, and then you just wait, and you wait for that feedback. As a creative artist, that's a tough thing to do. I think though, with maturity as an artist comes the ability to withstand that, and you with the confidence to know that it is as perfect as it can be, and you put it out for what it is, you promote it, you tell the story, you explain the why, and in the meantime, you know that you're going to go back and do it better. And so I look at the portfolio of Ferio Tego and Timeless, and I'm immensely proud of it. And I was happy that it, you know, this is almost like Ferio Tego would be the equivalent of I got to remaster my work. I got to take all these things that I worked on, and I actually got the opportunity to perfect it and tweak it all for a remastering edition, which I've never used that analogy before, but that is actually how it feels. So I've remastered this, but I also just dropped the new album, and Ferio Tego Elegancia 2021, Generoso 2021, that's my comeback album. And so at the same time, I got to remaster my classics that you got to hear through my engineering. Now you also get to hear what Ferio Tego is all about. And you're going to forever listen to these remasters under the portfolio of Ferio Tego. That is an awesome analogy. I'm so jazzed that you asked that question and I got there. So final answer, that's what I got. Justin, thank you.
Brilliant. Well, Michael, that's I would say a round of applause is certainly due after today's show. But I guess if eloquence and elegance would have a name in the cigar industry, it would have Michael Herklots written all over it. brief comment from Brian before we wrap it up. And again, many thanks.
Of course.
All the
Hi, Michael. I'll try and be quick. You're jazzed. I love that. I have a couple quick compliments and then a quick question. I feel like Coltrane Giant Steps is your song of your life and this amazing path and journey you've been on. Giant Steps all the way. Probably, I feel like you could make it so that when you enter the room, it's playing like your theme song everywhere you go.
I don't think I can afford to have it playing yet because you got to pay the rights. But once I can, we got to sell a few more cigars. That's on you. You guys buy a few more, and then we'll work on that.
There you go. Yeah, I've seen once a week for 2 years, I think, this show, and you've been one of my favorite guests when you were on before. And you know, some people stick in your memory, and you had given some advice. I had a question, and I'm going to paraphrase, but it's one of those moments where when someone says something to you that's so true, and you look at and you say, I knew that myself. I knew that inside of me, but someone has said it outside, and it rings so true, you know, the way you say it, that you're just like, of course, I knew that, but I needed someone to point it out. And I'm going to butcher it because I'm paraphrasing, but I was asking about fashion and style and paying money for clothes and the value of that. And you said it's about time, time spent making the money, and time spent wearing the item or using the thing that you bought, and the amount of value you can get out of it, and your own personal love of that item and time spent using it. That's what is the real value of the thing. You said it better, but that really resonated with me. And so thank you for that. And I think, yeah, you've got a great character. I mean, I think it points to who you are, that you had so many people, you know, backing you and going out of their way to be supportive. I think a lot of that, you'll humbly say, oh, it didn't have to do with me, but I think a lot of that just had to do with who you are as a person that they came to know. But I'm going to try and see if I can challenge you and get you to say something negative, because all your answers are so perfect and positive and inspiring. So going back to the fashion thing, obviously it's subjective what you like and what you wear and this and that. But is there a line somewhere in the midst of all that personal preference of good and bad? We like to play this game in LA, and maybe some of it's about where you are. We call it producer or homeless person, because the LA producers, what are you wearing? Like, it's like that. We look at somebody on the street and we're like, they could be like the biggest producer and we wouldn't know. And they were like, I don't know, homeless or producer. But so is there bad? And what is that line? Does it exist? And now that we've been talking about music too, I would challenge that same question for music. I love all music. I don't really call hardly anything bad. I will listen to pretty much anything. So there you go.
So to answer the second one first, no. There is no such thing as bad music, because there's no such thing as bad art. Whatever it is, it's an expression of the artist. It's just a matter of whether it appeals to me or not. So there is not a bad piece of art, period. Unless somehow it hurts people or kills people or something, then maybe that would be bad. From a fashion standpoint, good, bad, producer, homeless, I think you have to take into consideration circumstances, right? So if we use the yang to the yin, if the alternative is homeless, then suddenly that's not bad, is it? It's unfortunate, because that's a product of the circumstance, and that's actually a shame. So on the yin side of that yang, now you have someone who has left their home disheveled for whatever reason. And then you have to get to the circumstances. I mean, is the person emotionally or mentally fit or stable? I mean, are they aware that it's wrong or a mess? So I always tend to give people a benefit of the doubt. But where I really have no tolerance is when what you do is your way of passive aggressive middle finger disrespect for the people around you. And that is where I would say it draws the line. If you have something that is evocative, that pushes the line, as long as you're willing to have a conversation about it, because you're wearing it to charge a conversation, congratulations, you've done your job. If you're doing it to stoke conflict, I have very little respect for that. And that's not just clothing and fashion, that's also behavior. When people do things that is a passive aggressive way of saying, I don't care, and exude general disrespect with the things they do, the way they act, the way they smell, the way they dress. If you're sitting on an airplane and you're sitting next to me and you remove your shoes, I think that's problematic, unless you're in really good shape. Like Ben, she could probably take off her shoes and she's got like the prettiest toes in the world. But Brian, I'd imagine if you took off your shoes, I'd be less pleased with what I'd be looking at, never mind what might be wafting up from underneath 27E. So, I think there must be a line. Where I draw the line, of course, I believe in self-expression as an artist. But I equally believe in a baseline level of respect for everyone I may encounter, not knowing who that might be. So I would almost say that the analogy of the disheveled person, if that's their style and consistent, then it's deliberate, and then I might be okay with it. But if you've left your home to go to the grocery store and you've pulled your shorts and t-shirt from underneath your dirty clothes pile and you smell like a drawer as you walk by me, I have no forgiveness for that at all, because that's a deliberate, to me, middle finger and disrespect for everyone you may encounter. So, if you want to wear shorts and a t-shirt and sandals, go for it. And if that particular pair don't fit you, no problem. But at least make sure they're clean. At least comb your hair to whatever degree you can, or you have hair. And just a touch of effort, I think, is not to be arrogant or put on a show for people. I think there is something to be said for when you show even the basic levels of self-respect, that is also very reflective about how you feel about the people you may encounter. And particularly now, when we are all so radically charged by the messages that we encounter, by the news that we encounter, everything we see daily is designed specifically to trigger. And yet we are so largely closer together. I said this on a show the other night, and we was talking about industry, but we were talking about an industry divided. And I said, you are totally wrong about that. The industry division is no different than the nation's division, which is largely, despite the fact that we have different sides of the aisle, the majority of the people's thoughts are actually, we're all standing in the aisle. We're all in the aisle. You might be a little closer to one side or the other side, but for the most part, we are in the aisle. But we have gotten to a place where the house lights only shine on the seats. And so we are only amplifying the voices of the most vocal, obsessed, radical minority opinions and topics. We do it as an industry, we do it as a nation, and it's ridiculous. And largely, as humanity, we're all standing in the aisle, and guaranteed all of us disagree on things. We might disagree about one particular cigar over another, over a particular bottle of wine over another, how cigars age or don't age over time, whatever it is. Of course, there's one or two things that we disagree on, But because I like Panamericana and you like Sterling, that doesn't mean like that I hate kids, I want guns, and I have all these other automatic beliefs. And we have a tendency to do that. And we need to stop it. And I think something as simple as finding a way to leave your home with a level of neutrality that is an inviting for just a smile when you pass by and not anything further. Man, I think regardless of homeless, producer, truck driver, bus driver, doctor, cop, we're all so much closer. We've all dealt with the same shit for the last 2 years, you know? So I don't know what you're going through. You don't know what I'm going through. I'm not going to guess what you're dressed like and why. If you're dressed like shit, I'm going to hope it's for really unfortunate reasons. And I'm going to wish you the best. And then otherwise, give a little extra. If we all made a little extra effort and gave a little extra grace, we'd be a lot better off.
Great answer. Beautiful. Thank you. You had a great answer for a dumb question. That was really great. And smelling, that's the line. You draw the line at smelling. You heard it here first, folks. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Michael, it's been a tremendous pleasure, an honor and a privilege, as always, to have the chance and spend some precious time with you. It flies, and I'm just so grateful for everything that you shared with us and everything that you bring to the cigar industry and to many other industries, but what you bring to all of our lives. It's enriching and it's beautiful and it's greatly appreciated. So from
that is
heart, thank
that
you.
is obviously mutual. What you have done for our industry to cast a global net in a way that many American participants, whether in media, consumers, whatever, were never able to achieve that cross section, which you've done miraculously. You know, my hat goes off to you, and I always appreciate the invitation to come on and engage with you guys. And I always watch the stuff after. Typically when I'm working, I have it on and follow along. And you know, for everyone who watched along, or whether on Facebook or whatever, you know, I'm just endlessly grateful for your advocacy and for your confidence and for your support and your prayers and your good thoughts and your encouragement. And I really mean it when I say it. If you have spent the dollar on any of our products, you're a stakeholder in the success of this business. You are as close to a shareholder as a shareholder gets, because you own stock. You own a piece of us. And whether you own it physically in your humidor or you own it in your memory and in your heart, I am super, super grateful. And I would just ask that whatever you can do to be a part of our growth in advocating and supporting and amplifying, I would just be eternally grateful for that. So thank you for having me, and I hope we can get on again.
Thank you so much. Thank you from heart. It means the world. And Macy just said, can we get MH to do the light 'em up gang sign before the sign off? There it goes.
The other MH, pardon me.
I'm sure he will. And we all
Light 'em up.
Light 'em up.
Light them up. Got it.
Thank you all from heart. Michael, it's been a privilege and a pleasure. I look forward to sharing many more great conversations with you at PCA in Las Vegas in a few weeks and over the next weeks, months, years, decades, whatever it will be. I wish you nothing but the very best from heart. And we're all stakeholders in Ferio Tego, and proudly so. We're all here to support. Thank you from heart. All the very best. And I hope that all of you guys will join us next week for a little bit of smoking jacket history and another great show. Thank you from heart. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank
you. Bye.